Good morning. My name is Dulce Astorga. I'm the Family Self-Sufficiency Coordinator with the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara. And we are so happy to be here. Thank you for having us. We're excited to tell you a little bit about housing authorities, how they vary, our housing authority, the FSS program, and just get you excited about learning more about each housing authority in your area. So I'll go ahead and get started. On today's agenda, we have a few things. We're going to go over what a public housing authority is, how housing programs vary by county, the preferences that some housing authorities may have, how income from work affects housing assistance, and how to best connect with your local PHA. And a little overview on the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, or FSS, and I'll share a success story as well. So my colleague Janet will go ahead and get started.
Good morning, everybody. So as Dulce mentioned, my name is Janet. I have been with this particular housing authority a little over 10 years. And in my capacity, I am in regular contact with the public. So I answer a variety of questions, from applications to statistics to ideas, brainstorming, resources. I also am in contact with landlords and other housing authorities when we have transfers. So my knowledge base is a little broad in that sense. And so we felt it was, um, you know, advantageous that I can help, and I'm happy to answer questions after our presentation as well. So what is a PHA? A PHA is federally funded through HUD. Each PHA will have its own preferences, but we are all governed by HUD. And as it states here in a paragraph, it's established HUD qualifications and requirements for eligibility for continued assistance to qualified residents. And that is also paired with our own particular established preferences here locally in our agency. As I mentioned, we will have varying programs from agency to agency. You'll notice that depending on the agency you're in touch with, they might have home buying programs, whereas the next agency over may not. They may have senior programs that are funded differently, or projects or buildings that are funded separately that have a specific pocket of money that's allocated through HUD. We often hear that question a lot. Is this HUD housing? Most affordable programs are going to be HUD funded. So most housing programs are going to be HUD housing by nature. Next slide. So the programs that you'll see mostly through housing authorities programs, or housing authority agencies. The most popular one that you hear about is Section 8. That program is dedicated to, designed to dedicate about 30% towards rent for a household. So 30% of a person's income is dedicated to their rent. There's a little wiggle room in some places, especially for working families, to go up to 40%, but the design of the program is to stay as close to 30% as possible. Under the Section 8 category, you'll also hear about a program named Mainstream, which, as you can see here, is for applicants that are non-elderly. So they're between ages of 18 to 61 years of age, and they're disabled. The VASH program is for veterans and their surviving spouses. For that program, you do require a DD 214 for those that are veterans. You're probably familiar with that form, but it's issued through the Department of Defense, and they're surviving the spouses. So if they can show that at the time of the veteran's passing, they were still married, then they should receive the veteran's preference. project-based Section 8 is subsidy that is dedicated and attached to a particular building or a development, a project. So that subsidy does not transfer out. It does not leave a particular property. If the tenant vacates, if the household vacates, chances are they will not be able to take that subsidy anywhere else. It's attached to the unit. Tenant-based is also known as the voucher program. That is what most people associate when they hear Section 8, it's the voucher program. The voucher program is one that does transfer from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. There's an industry term called portability. So if you currently have knowledge of Section 8, you may be able to inquire about porting that out to another jurisdiction. It would be a question to address to your local housing authority. Other programs that, for example, this agency has is supportive services buildings, supportive services properties. Typically, those are going in our agency, they're dedicated to veterans, the formerly homeless or chronically homeless in our jurisdiction, in our agency. And then the youth aging out of foster care, we find that those youth need, they lack the social network that can give them the social support of, what a family typically provides. So they need some extra supportive services. The Family Unification Program is a referral that we get from social services, and those are mostly for families that have been displaced for a variety of reasons, but now they're trying to unify that particular household. So they have their own process to go through with social services to eventually end up with our offices. But that is also a program that's out in the community. TBRA, tenant-based rental assistance, it's similar to Section 8, and the subsidy and the program is very, very similar. But it does have an expiration date. For example, it's predetermined how much time they can have the subsidy. Typically, it can be transferred to another type of assistance, but it is a temporary voucher for somebody that's experiencing homelessness. They could end up with a permanent situation. That's always the goal. And then RAD is also what used to be known as public housing. It's now rental assistance demonstration. It's a term that was coined by HUD, and I'm not really familiar exactly how they got to that definition, but it's basically the program that was formerly known as public housing. Public housing were developments that were developed with HUD funding that were managed by local housing authorities. And so that's still the case. Funding is just a little bit different. It's not the same public housing brackets. Other housing authorities across the nation still have public housing programs. We do not. And that again just highlights one of the differences between our agency and another agency in another part of the country. Non-subsidized programs is something we have. So this agency has buildings that we have acquired that we manage similarly to other buildings, but they do not have subsidy. So a senior living in a non-subsidized unit will not have financial backing from subsidy. Those rents are typically less than market rent, but they don't provide the financial assistance of Section 8 or project-based Section 8. They're just being held at a lower rate so that they're more affordable. And the same goes with Workforce. Workforce is a program that was developed to assist those that are in the working class. They make too much money possibly to afford or to qualify for low income programs like Section 8, but they don't make enough for most coastal cities in California. They don't make enough to either save up to buy a home or afford those higher rate rents. So they're in that middle that they could use some assistance on our part where we can offer them a unit that is a lower rate than the open market. There is a minimum income required for both of these categories because they have to be able to afford the lower rent without subsidy, without putting themselves in a financial crisis where they're dedicating 80% of their income towards rent plus living expenses. So that is a requirement. Something that will differ from housing to another housing authority and jurisdiction to jurisdiction, even in California, from one area to another, states to state, it will vary because HUD determines fair market rents. So the rent here in Santa Barbara may be different than the rent in Bakersfield. So we will have different payment standards. The current payment standard, as an example, here in our jurisdiction and our offices, a studio goes for a voucher, a Section 8 voucher payment standard is $2,550. For a one bedroom is $2,900 and a two bedroom is $3,290. Preferences will also be something that differs from agency to agency. Our agency does give a preference to local residents. Residency is determined by either through employment or actual physical residency. So somebody could be working in the next town over, but have employment here. And so most of their time is spent here. And so they do receive the residency preference. A veteran status or the surviving spouse, that is a preference that we do provide to those that are applicants. A homeless preference we also have. We will definitely assist somebody that is homeless and a resident and not assisted before we're able to assist somebody that is not homeless, is not a resident, and is not a senior in some categories. In the recent past, I want to say in 2018, we did have a lease in place preference that was allowed to us by HUD. It was a small percentage of our new voucher issuance. We are currently not observing that preference, but who's to say that it could come back under HUD's instructions in the future. Again, just want to highlight that each agency will need to confirm their preferences with you. Some agencies will not have even the residency preference. They will contact any applicant from anywhere in the country. Now, for our agency, anybody in the country can apply to put themselves on the wait list and at least let the time that they're going to be waiting begin to accumulate. However, when we reach their name on the wait list, if they are not a local resident, we will need to move on to the next eligible applicant. And so now I will let Dulce take over the presentation as she is better fit or better equipped to discuss income for housing.
Thank you, Janet. So how does income from work affect housing? Each household has the responsibility to report all sources of income at a time in accordance with the PHA's policies. And so generally, what happens is that the level of assistance that the housing authority gives is adjusted as a participant's income increases or decreases. The PHA is required to count income that's anticipated to be received from a source outside the family during the 12-month period following either admission or an annual reexamination date. And some required reporting information. HUD regulations give each public housing authority the option to determine the circumstances under which families will be required to report changes affecting income. For example, our policy for our personal housing authority is that families are required to report all changes in income within 30 days of the date that the change takes effect. Some other examples of um, required reporting are changes defined as income or expense conditions that are verified to last a minimum of 60 days. So for our housing authority, if the change is not going to last at least 60 days, then we're probably not going to move forward with making changes. Again, these are just examples of our policies, and maybe other housing authorities um, have these policies as well, but you just have to kind of check in with them. Also, changes resulting in an increase of $500 or more per month and changes in source of income will require us to complete an interim reexamination, meaning a reexamination of income between each annual reexamination. Um, Also, our public housing authority will conduct an interim for changes that result in a reduction of income if the reduction is going to be equal to $200 a month or 10% of a household's gross income, whichever is lower. Um, so. And for self-employment, it's not subject to an interim examination for rent reduction unless that self-employment has ended. So we won't make changes if self-employment income has gone down unless it's something that's going to completely stop. And then I wanted to share a little bit about a lot of people ask about like an income cap. It's not necessarily an income cap, but um, when a family no longer requires assistance, basically it means that their income has increased. And so because their income increases, the housing authority payment, of course, decreases. So if the amount of assistance provided by the housing authority is reduced to zero, then the family's assistance terminates after a grace period of 180 days. And again, this is our policy with the 180 days. You'd have to check with each housing authority as to their policy. But when a family is able to pay their full contract rent with at least 30% of their income, then they no longer need us and they can pay their full contract rent. And if it stays that way for at least 180 days and there are no changes that are of no fault of their own, then their housing assistance is terminated at that point. There are instances where income may be excluded. Some examples of where work income is excluded are through qualified work training programs. So incremental earnings and benefits to any family member resulting from them participating in a qualifying state or local employment training program and training of a family member as a resident management staff are excluded from annual income. Um, so for our housing authority, we define a training program as a learning process with goals and objectives, generally having a variety of components and taking place in a series of sessions over a period of time. The training program is usually designed to lead to a higher level of proficiency and enhances that individual's ability to obtain employment. So the training program may have like performance standards to measure proficiency. That training could include something like classroom training in a specific occupational skill, on the job training with wages subsidized by a program, or basic basic education. And I think that was one of the questions that had come up that was shared with us previous to the presentation, um, asking about um, if a social security recipient wants to work, and they're going through the adult work experience, which is usually temporary work, and what can they do to not lose their housing? Well, you should check with your local public housing authority to see if that adult work experience program qualifies as a employment training program, and if that income may be excluded. Also, HUD-funded training programs, the income from HUD-funded training programs is excluded. A couple other income, not from work necessarily, but income that's excluded are lump sums received as a result of delays in processing, Social Security and SSI payments, or lump sums or prospective monthly amounts received as deferred disability benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Another policy that I wanted to share that I think may be common among housing authorities is the exclusion of income from full-time students. So any full-time student that's not the head of household, the spouse, a co-head, or a household member who's over the age of 24, or any member with their own dependents, their income would be excluded. And the full-time student must attend and receive a passing grade, and for their full-time course load for each year and semester or trimester. And I will pass this section on back to my colleague Janet.
Thanks, Ms. Dulce. Okay, so one of the topics that we wanted to cover, and it's coming up a lot on the chat and the questions, is how to reach your local PHA. So this is this part of the presentation. So HUD has a great list of all local PHAs across the nation. So if you just go to HUD.gov and you click on a local public housing link, which is, I took a screenshot of the exact page that they have up right now. It's one of the tiles there at the very bottom that says local housing, local public housing. If you click on that, and then you select on the state. Next slide, Dulce. You'll see this come up. This is again a screenshot of the very next page that you will see. You'll see that it has the map of the nation, and then the drop down on the left hand side there. If you select for us, you select California. And the next screen will show you where I was able to locate our own information. It has our street address, our phone number, our fax number, an email address for our CEO, and that would determine too, it doesn't list their website, but typically the last part of any email will indicate to you a website. So in this case, as you can see, the website for our agency, our housing authority, is hacsb.org. So if you go to www.hacsb.org, you'll have our page. And I would assume it's the same for the other emails, although you might want to maybe contact them directly and verify that that's the case. And I'll hand it back over to Dulce to inform you about her FSS overview.
Thank you. Yes. So excited to share information about the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. And basically, it's a program that gives our participants an opportunity to increase their earned income and reduce their dependency on welfare assistance, as well as rental subsidies, while also increasing their assets or savings through an escrow account that we manage. The participation in the FSS program is voluntary, and the only real requirement is a willingness to seek and maintain employment and a desire to become self-sufficient. And that could mean different things for different people. So, who can participate in the FSS program? Clients of the Section 8 program and RAD program. So, active recipients of Section 8 and RAD programs. Unfortunately, if you're on the waiting list, you're not able to join the FSS program. You also must be at least 18 years of age or older and have eligible immigration status, which means at least be a resident and be eligible for Section 8 and or RAD. And of course, anyone who's motivated to change their life circumstances through employment or education or health and family services. And basically, what we do in the FSS program is that we meet with clients to establish goals, and they work with their case manager and other community agencies to achieve those goals. Um, some of those goals might include increasing their earned income or higher education, usually in order to get a good job or a better job. Some of our clients are interested in starting a business, or maybe they've already started some sort of a business and they want to learn how to kind of formalize it. A lot of participants also set financial goals, like budgeting or repairing or building credit, building a savings, maybe starting a retirement or adding more to their retirement. They also learn about investing and managing debt. Some of the activities and like support services that the FSS program can provide are things like vocational assessment, or maybe someone might need childcare, so we would connect them with resources for childcare, or maybe transportation assistance, and maybe that just means like providing bus passes or things like assistance with car repairs, or if it's educational goals, then maybe obtaining their high school equivalent or GED, or ESL classes, technology, computer literacy, um, post-secondary certificates or advanced degrees, or maybe just some skills training, training in executive functions or basic skills training. Um, and there are things in the medical field, or things I see a lot, CNAs or phlebotomy licenses, x-ray techs. Some require like on-the-job training, so we can connect them with resources for things like that as well. Um, And then one of the biggest benefits to the FSS program is the escrow account, which provides a, a way to save. And the savings account is created and maintained by the housing authority. The escrow account is established when an FSS participant's rent increases due to an increase in earned income or work income. Participants must successfully achieve all of the goals on their individual training and services plan in order to be eligible to receive the funds that have been saved in the escrow account. So that's very exciting. And what does it mean to successfully complete the FSS program? The head of the FSS family must be suitably and gainfully employed, and that'll be determined just based on the individual, on their level of education, on their past job experience, their skills, and of course the available jobs in the area. So they have to be employed by the end of the contract. And the contract is a 5-year contract, but you are able to graduate early from the FSS program if you meet all the required goals or any goal that you've set for yourself on the individual training and services plan. All family members must also be independent of TANF or cash aid in order to graduate. And like I said, they must complete all goals that they've set on their ITSP and signed on the contract of participation. And I wanted to share a success story from a recent graduate. Linda, who is from Santa Barbara and is a single mom of two kiddos, a son and a daughter, now has two grandkids. After divorce, Linda applied for Section 8 housing and waited 7 years before being housed in 2016 with her special needs daughter. And in 2018, Linda joined the FSS program to improve her life. And through the FSS program, she was able to take financial literacy classes where she learned how to budget and save money and improve her credit. She went on to earn an associate's degree in culinary arts and work full-time at a local hotel. And then she also started her own taco business as a chef. And she credits her success to the support from the FSS and Section 8 programs. The FSS program also has funds of money that FSS participants can access. Um, Things like interim disbursements. So when an FSS participant starts saving into that escrow account, they can make a request um, to get up to 30% of what's in the FSS escrow account. It has to be towards a goal that they've set for themselves. But for example, Linda, with the starting of her business, if she had any startup costs, she could make a request to have an interim disbursement from her escrow account to use that money towards her startup costs of her business. There's also the forfeited escrow fund. So a participant on FSS who doesn't complete the program, who doesn't graduate from the program, unfortunately forfeits the money that they have accumulated in their escrow account. And so then that money is available to any FSS participants who are on the program and in good standing. So she no longer needs Section 8. She's off the program. She plans to grow her business, continue to grow her business, and someday hopes to become a homeowner. And I can attest to the fact that Linda's tacos are delicious. Our housing authority has actually hired her on to cater a few events in the past. So we're very excited for her. And that concludes our presentation. And I thank you all for having us.
Great. Thank you, Janet and Dulce.
You.
Very informative information. I know in the links and in the Q&A, we've been providing some of the resources that were mentioned and how to get connected to a local PHA. You know, really appreciate the insights and the supports. I think people now have a pretty good understanding that questions about housing really need to be addressed by their local public housing programs. And so you've given us a lot of information to help us get connected to those resources. Based on past conversations and some of the questions that are coming in, one way to quickly find out about local housing supports is to contact 211. That might be your first step. Would you agree with that, Dulce?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Aside from, housing assistance, they provide a lot of other different resources. And that's something we wanted to highlight as well is that not only housing authorities are the only ones who provide housing assistance. There are sometimes other resources in the community that we should also make ourselves aware of and get on those wait lists as well. What would you say, Janet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before our presentation, when we were preparing, we made mention that there are other resources that are available to the community that are sort of they're not attached to local housing authorities. So they're not something that we can help with. So there's not like an application process for an individual landlord that can have their own properties or their own programs. So there's not like a master way of applying to all local programs. But for example, as I mentioned in my capacity here at the Housing Authority of the City of Santa Barbara, I can inform the public that is inquiring that there are local agencies, local landlords that have their own programs. One comes to mind that is across the street. They have their own community, they have their own wait list, their own funding, and they are not affiliated with the Housing Authority. So the public has to contact them directly and ask them what their availability are, what their requirements are. As an example, one of the differences between them and us is our senior programs begin at 62, whereas their minimum senior age is 65. And because they're privately owned, they can have that, that particular requirement on their own. And so locating your local PHA, contacting your local PHA, cannot just, or it doesn't have to be just about their programs. They can inform you about what else is in the community. Another resource that seems sort of counterintuitive to somebody that is not experiencing homelessness might be their local shelters. The local shelters, although they are dedicated to assisting those that are already experiencing homelessness, they might also have information about homelessness prevention programs. So it could be things like programs that can catch you up on your rent, that can provide grants for paying off utility bills, so that might, alleviate a household to not end up in homelessness, which is a detrimental cycle to try and break. So contacting your local PHA can get you a lot of information outside of their own programs. Of course, they would be the only ones to inform you about their programs and their qualifications, requirements, etc. But they could be a great source of information outside of just their offices. Now, in the chat, I did see some comments and questions that sometimes it is difficult to reach staff inside of a PHA. We hear that a lot. Fortunately, our administration focuses on not having an automated answering service. We answer about 90% of our calls. But that is not the case for a lot of other housing authorities that are overwhelmed because they're so much bigger. Our agency is smaller. Our jurisdiction is a small percentage of the county. So again, we're the city housing authority. There's also the county housing authority. And so their jurisdiction is, I think, maybe about 3 times as big as ours. So they have, a vast higher number of tenants and applicants to get to. So they may not be able to answer as quickly as we might be. But that I'm sure there is their intention to answer every inquiry that they might receive. You may have a better opportunity to contact busy agencies like that through their website. Maybe they have like a contact us link. Sending an email might also get you, those answers that you might need, and you will have record of the question that you asked so that you can, have that for future reference. So you can find a lot of information by just contacting your local PHA. So yeah.
That is very helpful. I wasn't aware of that either. So 211, local PHA. Are there any other resources that you can think of? I know HUD has a list of approved housing counselors. Let me go ahead and give everyone that telephone number. That might also be a good place to start to learn more about how to get connected to your local PHA, as well as how the counselor might be able to help you. And so that number is 800-569-4287. Again, that number is 800-569-4287 is 202-708-1455.
Do want to know, and I know some are wondering, how do they check a wait list or how far they are on the wait list?
That is a very good question, Vanessa. And I use this again, this is my realm because I get these questions every day, often. So our agency, up until recently, had a different computer system for our database. So we have established, since I've been here, and currently we have established status hours. So, but again, remember that our agency has a different ability to answer phones, different than other agencies. So we have status hours. This agency has status hours from Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday between 8 and 10. We have staff that is dedicated to answering these questions. Since our computer system changed, applicants have their own portal that they can log into and check on their status. It is difficult for any PHA to give a specific wait time. You'll find that some housing authorities will allocate a specific wait list number to their applicants. And we don't observe that practice because we have so much flux on our wait list that there's just no way for us to give a number and then the next week the number may have changed. Again, remember our preferences. If we had a veteran outreach take place in our community and we find 10 homeless veterans, they submit their application and now somebody that was number 20 is now number 30. And then maybe we have some appointments take place, some people that drop off the wait list, and then the next following day they're number 23. So it varies so much that we do not observe that. Other housing authorities do. They find that practice to be something that they can manage well. So you'll hear that a lot where applicants will say, "What's my number on the wait list?" And we don't observe that practice, but we can provide any applicant with an average wait time. So, for example, our agency, last time that we opened for the Section 8 voucher program was May 2nd of 2022. We are still, to this day, looking at applications from May 2nd of 2022. That's 2.5 years later. We're still on the same day because we received so many applications the very first day that it was open. So somebody that applied May 10th of 2022, we cannot give them an exact wait time. We might be looking at, another year or two. Also to inform your audience that the housing authorities, we are all funded through HUD funding. So we are sort of at the mercy as to what the federal government decides to allocate to public housing programs, and that would be Section 8. So whenever you hear the Congress establishing the federal budget, one of the categories will be public housing programs. So if it's lessened, you can expect that the wait lists for any housing authority or most housing authorities will be a greater wait time because we would slow down on the households that we're able to contact. If the if the budget is increased, then that might mean that your local housing authority receives more funding so that they're able to contact more applicants. Because it varies so much, it's almost impossible for a housing authority to give you an exact wait time as to when you will be contacted. Similarly, or separately, but similarly, for programs like project-based Section 8 or public housing, housing is that program is going to be dependent on vacancies. So we can't really predict how many vacancies we will experience in the next 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. So there's no way for us to say, yeah, exactly in 2 years we will contact you, because we might have no vacancies. We might have a lot of vacancies. We may be able to acquire another building, or we may be able to finish up a construction of something that was already underway when you applied. So determining a wait time is difficult for any housing authority. So I don't know if I answered that question, but I think that's at least my perspective being here for this long and in my capacity.
Yeah, I think that was a clarified quite a bit, actually, Janet. Do we speak with a PHA if we want to learn about replacement housing? And I'm imagining maybe that's shifting from one housing program to another.
Um, yeah, I mean, that would be a question to dedicate to their local housing authority. If they're already participants and they want to go from project-based to tenant-based, it's possible, but it definitely is a conversation to have with their case manager. They would be the only ones to determine whether or not that's available through their budget or through their agency if they manage a different program that they're trying to shift into. It's definitely a conversation that needs to have happen with their local housing authority rep.
Yeah, it'll all depend on funding. For example, right now, our housing authority is not issuing vouchers, and that means that anybody who has a project-based voucher is not able to obtain a tenant-based voucher. And I'm not sure if this is our policy, but our policy only, but after a year of somebody having a project-based voucher, they are able to request a tenant-based voucher if we have the funding and if we're issuing vouchers. So,
Okay, yeah. Thank you. All right, and I know that you answered this during the presentation, but maybe you can just give a real quick high-level recap. Um, we have, people who are afraid to work because they will lose their Section 8 housing, yet they're on SSI or SSDA and are limited at how much they'll be able to make. How can they work and keep their Section 8 housing?
yeah, that's a good question. Um, I think I talked a little bit about that as far as like if they're working, I think they mentioned in like the adult work experience, and that maybe that would qualify as a state or local employment training program for which income might be excluded depending on if it qualifies as a training program based on that housing authority's definition. So again, like our housing authority, um, they define a training program as a learning process. It does have to have goals and objectives, and it has to have a be within a certain time period. Um, and so training programs could include anything from like classroom training to obtain specific like occupational skills or on the job training, where sometimes wages are subsidized by a program. For example, here in our area, I know Department of Rehabilitation works with PathPoint to connect recipients of DOR services to work training programs. So that's something to consider and to ask your local PHA if they have, if you know what they define as a training program, and to talk to your case manager if you're already on Section 8.